The topic of discussion today is interdependence in international relations. Now we start off with an example. Country A depending on country B for some reason. Country B depending on country C for some other reasons. Now this is the process of mutual dependence, and soon it may lead to the process of interdependence. In international relations, interdependence is very necessary because a country cannot acquire everything through self-sufficiency. Import and export of goods and services have enhanced the process of interdependence. Oil is also a factor which has created greater global interdependence. Now, interdependence is the mutual reliance between two or more groups. Thinkers like Karl Marx, Mahatma Gandhi, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Stephen Covey, and many others have supported interdependence. Karl Marx, in his Communist Manifesto, has used the term interdependence. He spoke of universal interdependence of nations in comparison to the old, local and national seclusion of independence and self-sufficiency. Various classical civilizations over the ages established trading networks among themselves. Goods and ideas were continuously shared among each other, and this led to improvement of the ancient civilizations. Today, international interdependence is strong and continuously increasing in the era of globalization. International trade is taken to be an indicator of interdependence. International financial flows among the nations is also supporting interdependence. Interdependence exists when a country by unilateral action can inflict harm or provide benefits to other countries. Interdependence is measured by the costs of severing the relationship or the benefits of developing it. Benjamin Cohen has stated that there are two necessary characteristics for existence of dependency. One, a high measure of sensitivity to external forces. Two, a high measure of irreversibility of impact. Now, the dependent nation is a nation which is greatly affected by the decisions made by other nations. Now, for example, in Soviet Union during the Stalinist period, the East European states were totally dependent on Soviet Union. Decisions regarding polity, economy, security, and many other spheres were actually taken in Moscow, and the East European countries abided by it blindly. Stalin took a very important role in this policy of influencing the decisions of the communist countries of the East European nations. Marshall R. Singer identified 5 types of potential dependency. 1. Political. 2. Military. 3. Economic. 4. Communication. 5. Perceptual or identity. Under Marshall R. Singer's dependency scheme, there exists varying degrees of dependency and varying degrees of types of dependencies. Now the question arises that is it more significant, for example, that country A's economic dependence on country B is increasing? Or is it more significant that country A's political dependence on country B is decreasing. If interdependence is defined solely as mutual dependence, the concept is overtly simplistic. Most authors recognize the multifaceted nature of interdependence, although they realize that the economic aspects of interdependence are much more important than the other aspects. Gerhard Mully had stated that interdependence may best be defined as a complex, transnational phenomenon which involves pluridimensional, multi-sectional patterns of interactions between nations which result in enhanced mutual sensitivity and vulnerability. Now, what is pluridimensional? It indicates a global, regional, and continental scope of impact. Multi-sectional implies that a broad spectrum of political, environmental, economic, technical, and socio-cultural activity is involved. Interdependence is a complex phenomenon. It is both objective and subjective. Interdependence may be a physical reality or a subjective acknowledgement of mutual dependence. Interdependence implies that actors are interrelated and connected such that something that happens to a particular actor on a particular occasion at a particular pace will affect all the other actors. As international system experiences interdependence, there is a great deal of sensitivity which is involved. While such high degrees of interdependence are supposed to be amicable to cooperation, the symmetry of the international community can modify sensitivity to vulnerability. When the system is experiencing symmetry, all the actors concerned typically benefit more or less evenly. But when the system is asymmetrical, some actors benefit more than the other actors. Interdependence has been given different definitions and different analysis by different schools of thought. Two theorists defined the core tenets of their new model of complex interdependence. Robert Cohen and Joseph Nye have stated that actors other than states participate directly in world politics. A clear hierarchy of issues do not exist, as included in the classical realist school, where the military security is given predominant position compared to the other arenas. Force is an ineffective instrument of policy. Robert Cohen and Joseph Nye continued to supply empirical research to support legitimacy of their notions through various case studies. International organizations and institutions have been present on the world stage for some time now. But with the coming in of the globalization, the transnational corporations are playing a very important role in contributing to interdependence. Every issue today has at least one international organization or institution dedicated to facilitating collective cooperation in that era. The arena of cooperation is increasing, and it is creating a channel of communication among the actors who are concerned about those particular issues. This increased communication often can aid in alleviating an asymmetrical system. In the post-Second World War, we found that two international economic institutions, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, emerged from the Bretton Woods plan to help rebuild states hit hardest by the war. In the post-Second World War period, America came to the support of Europe so that it could rebuild and reconstruct itself. Asymmetrical situations can often lead to highly manipulative sets of relations, with one actor being dependent totally on another actor. Actors of interdependent system can be plagued by negative externalities arising from domestic pursuits of one of the actors. There are flaws in the structure. Robert Cohen and Joseph Nye conclude that they are part of the long-term and structural effects of interdependent systems. It is important to understand that although interdependence is often classed as a theory, it is not to say that it strives to replace the traditional structural theories like realism, neorealism, or neoliberalism. Academics from each of these models have their own views on interdependence, and it has played an important role in the international community. Interdependence remains a feature of many aspects of human activity. Historically, the term had been involved in understanding the social, political, and security realm as well as the economic sphere. Surge of interest in the idea of interdependence emerged in the mid-1970s. But the growth of international economic interdependence was already there. The term interdependence has been used in seriously imprecise manner. Its definition has been subject to considerable controversy within the field of international political economy. One school of thought equates interdependence with patterns of interconnectedness among peoples. Interdependence is to be identified in the pattern of associations and interaction among actors at various levels. Now, the range of measures may indicate such interconnectedness like number of telephone calls, number of emails, flows of goods and services, correlations among such indicators as the rates of interest paid within separate national economies. There are two basic problems with the view of interdependence as interconnectedness. Number one, the widely held view is that it contradicts the common usage and understanding of the term. Number two, while many patterns of interconnectedness may be quite intense, they are not self-evidently of great significance. The alternative and more traditional approach to interdependence defines it in terms of the existence of significant dependencies between or among those who experience the phenomenon. Interdependence is thus seen as the condition of mutual dependence between two or more actors or agents. Two-stage definitions of interdependence is necessary. The first stage is the definition of dependence, and the second stage is the definition of interdependence as a condition of mutual dependence. Drawing on the earlier work of Robert Cohen and Joseph Nye and later contribution by R.J. Barry Jones and Peter Willits, the following definition has been given. Dependency exists for any actor when a satisfactory outcome on any matter of significance for that actor requires an appropriate situation or development elsewhere. Interdependence exists for a grouping of two or more actors when each is dependent on at least one other member of that group for satisfactory outcomes on any issues of concern. Peculiar fact of intellectual history that international relations scholars writing on interdependence paid little attention to treatments of this topic by previous generations of scholars in the field. Robert Cohen and Joseph Nye, for example, virtually ignored the scholarly treatments of interdependence prior to Second World War. The opposed concepts of self-reliance and dependence are basic to the understanding of Machiavelli's Prince. Defining dependence in terms of reliance on others implies a lack of self-sufficiency. The second basic meaning of dependence, defined in terms of benefits that would be costly for one or both parties to forego. Interstate dependence always exists, and it existed even during the period when the early mercantilists exchanged goods and services among each other, and it was also found in the writings of Montesquieu and Rousseau. In the field of international relations, economic interdependence has two meanings. One, a group of countries is considered interdependent if economic conditions in one are contingent on those found in others. For example, if inflation in the United States quickly places upward pressure on prices in Mexico. Number 2, countries are considered interdependent if it would be costly for them to rupture or forego their relationship. For example, the developed countries and the OPEC countries. The first of these is generally referred to as sensitivity interdependence. The second is called vulnerability interdependence. The key difference between sensitivity and vulnerability interdependence is based on the costs that countries would bear should relations between them be ruptured. Although these forms of interdependence and the differences between them are fairly straightforward, developing adequate indicators is not very easy to achieve. Distinct measures are needed for each of them, as they often do not move in lockstep. While there may be extensive or complex economic connections between states, they may not find it especially costly to replace these connections, either by expanding economic interactions with third parties or by making domestic economic adjustments. The best measures of sensitivity and vulnerability interdependence involves information about a counterfactual situation, namely what costs would be to a country if economic conditions changed in or relations were interrupted with country B. Difficulties obtaining reliable estimates of that situation complicate efforts to measure interdependence. Robert Cohen and Joseph Nye object to defining interdependence in terms of mutual benefit. In some cases, an interdependent relationship may have such negative consequences that both parties would be quite happy to cease contact with one another entirely, foregoing the benefits which were associated with this interdependence. Mutually unpleasant relationships of interdependence, such as arms races, are maintained because the likely alternatives would be even more unpleasant. This is the only reason why United States and Soviet Union tried to continue their relationship during the Cold War. They continued with the strategic interdependence among themselves. Prior to Second World War, discussions on international interdependence focused on and advocated world government or disarmament. Now, this attribution of normative bias was there, and it has been challenged and criticized by many, but it is a fact that this normative bias is not justifiable every time. The process of international specialization and exchange is viewed as creating international interdependence. The world is becoming interdependent, that without world government or disarmament, the achievement of many values to which people now subscribe, such as peace and economic well-being, will be impeded, challenged, or prevented. Now, there is this concept that the world is slowly becoming very poor, very brutish, very nasty. The definition of Hobbes regarding the states of nature is being found in the world scenario today. The world government is necessary according to many. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for the human rights to be supported of the rich and the poor. It is not at all a rosy picture. Interdependence is creating many issues, both positive as well as negative. The world will be really unpleasant to live in if interdependence is not there. It's very necessary that the nations, the countries, come together and try to understand the challenging situations and provide solutions to the problems which are being faced by the global community. It is not a normative argument. It is not based on a normative concept of interdependence. International relations scholars have discussed dependence and interdependence with reference to self-sufficiency and vulnerability of a state to alterations in certain kinds of international relationships, especially trade. William E. Rappert cites a bizarre example of mutual dependence during the First World War, in which the costs of breaking off trade was so high that the two states on opposite sides carried on some trade with each other. The work of Karl Deutsch is frequently cited in discussions of interdependence. In 1954, Karl Deutsch referred to interdependence in terms of interlocking relationships arising from the division of labor between highly specialized political units. He distinguished this interdependence from a relationship of mutual responsiveness among political units that might not be dependent upon each other, that is, might be able to do without each other's aid. By 1966, Karl Deutsch abandoned the earlier concept of interdependence, started defining interdependence in terms of the covariance of the aspects of different systems, a usage corresponding to dependence, and current concept of sensitivity interdependence. Since 1968, two basic meanings of interdependence have been embodied in the works of Richard N. Cooper and Kenneth Waltz. Sensitivity interdependence has been associated with the works of Richard N. Cooper, and vulnerability interdependence has been associated with the works of Kenneth Waltz. The distinction between sensitivity interdependence, defined in terms of mutual effects, and vulnerability interdependence, defined in terms of the opportunity costs of disrupting the relationship, has become a widely accepted and attributed to Cohen and Nye. Today, in a globalized world, we understand that a crisis in a particular part of the world is not the crisis of that area only. It can spread to other areas. A natural calamity, when it is happening in Nepal, other countries, the neighboring countries as well as countries far beyond, are trying to help Nepal in order to save the people who are there. On the other hand, when Islamic State problems are coming up in Syria, refugees are moving to Europe, there's a continuous discussion in the global community how to protect the rights of these refugees and convincing the European states to support these refugees because they do not have anywhere to go. Interdependence is very much necessary. Interdependence is increasing in globalization, but it is also necessary that we try to prevent the negative aspects of interdependence. In the globalized area, we find human trafficking is increasing, drug trafficking is increasing. These things are spreading to all the countries of the world and actually leading to situations when people are dying, their rights are not being protected. So interdependence is necessary. It has to be used positively, protecting the lives of people, giving food to the people who are not being able to get it. But on the other hand, we cannot allow terrorism to spread. We cannot allow human trafficking to spread. Interdependence has to be utilized in the most positive manner, and any negative impact of it needs to be totally controlled and it has to be nipped in the bud.